This is something that may, to Carl and Rachel's point, actually be a bigger problem for Poilievre.
We're talking about how the Liberal government exercised extreme government overreach that no other Canadian government has done, and they're making it Pierre Poilievre's problem.
Yesterday, the Federal Court of Appeal dealt another blow to the Liberal government, upholding the January 2024 ruling that Justin Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act was unconstitutional. Now, Liberal commentators are working to distance the current government from that decision, while also arguing, telling Canadians that it no longer matters.
Let's take a look.
Sabrina, what are the stakes for the federal government of trying to take this fight to the Supreme Court?
I am not sure that the Mark Carney government will take this fight to the Supreme Court because, again, I think one of the distinctions is that this happened under the Trudeau, obviously under Trudeau as Prime Minister, and I think Mark Carney's done a lot of things to be distinctly different from anything that Justin Trudeau did. I think there's two implications, though, for the government in general. So number one, I think from a political standpoint, there's not a lot of repercussions here. I think Canadians have largely forgotten about this, maybe not the downtown Ottawa precinct, but certainly across the country. I don't think this matters to the majority of Canadians.
What a flippant remark.
Canadians have forgotten about this. This doesn't matter to the majority of Canadians. Now, remember, folks, we've talked about this before, where people that go on mainstream media, they don't tell people what Canadians think. They tell Canadians what to think. And this is a prime example of it. This is a Liberal commentator going on mainstream media, trying to pontificate on this and tell everybody, don't care about this anymore. Don't worry about the fact that this is the only time in Canadian history that the Canadian government completely trampled on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms by using the Emergencies Act. There's other things that they've done, but in terms of the Emergencies Act, this was a whole different ballgame. The Canadian government has never seized the bank accounts of folks that were just donating to a protest.
Without due process, may I add.
They've never arrested protesters and prosecuted them like they did. They've never sent in the Mounties to literally run down protesters like they did. And then try to call this an insurrection, try to call this people overthrowing the government. This has never happened. And the Liberals want you to forget about it. And the Liberals want to tell everybody, this doesn't matter. No, this is something that Canadians should remember for a long, long time, because this was literally the government exercising its power, overreaching its mandate, and suspending what is our charter rights. This was a terrifying day in Canada, not for just what happened, but because it displayed that things that happen in third world countries happened right here at home.
Well, and it set a dangerous precedent, right? We don't like your protest. You're not doing anything illegal per se. So we're just going to come in and shut it down and seize the bank accounts of those involved unlawfully again. Who's to stop them from doing that in the future?
And I think that the second really important question is going to be, is what does define a national security threat? And in 2022, that maybe didn't matter as much because we had some good friends down south of the border. It matters a lot now. And so I think for Carney and for the public safety team to really go back and think about the implications of this and with respect to what a real public security threat looks like, especially when you think about, like, for example, the separatist movement in Alberta. I think that's going to be the biggest question that they're going to have to face, and maybe not publicly, but certainly internally.
So this is the definition of somebody who is on this panel and shouldn't be, because she has no idea what the heck she's talking about. Oh, we should really think about the definition of what a threat to national security really is. Well, we don't have to think about it, lady, because it's already defined. And this is why the original decision happened in the first place in January 2024 from Judge Mosley, because the whole point of this is the Emergencies Act cannot be invoked unless there's a threat to national security. And in the Emergencies Act, it says that that is defined. And where is it defined? In the CSIS Act. What does it say there? Well, let's just take a look one more time. So this is the CSIS Act, folks. And if you look, you can see right near the top of the page, or it says, threats to the security of Canada means A, espionage or sabotage that is against Canada or is detrimental to the interests of Canada or activities directed toward or in support of such espionage or sabotage. B, foreign influenced activities within or relating to Canada that are detrimental to the interests of Canada and are clandestine or deceptive or involve a threat to any person. C, activities within or relating to Canada directed toward or in support of the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property for the purpose of achieving a political, religious, or ideological objective within Canada or a foreign state. And D, activities directed toward undermining by covert unlawful acts or directed toward or intended ultimately to lead to the destruction or overthrow by violence of the constitutionally established system of government in Canada. But does not include, this is the key point, lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent unless carried on in conjunction with any of the activities referred to in paragraphs A to D. It's quite clearly spelled out there. So for this lady to say, well, we need to really think about the definition. You don't have to think about the definition. The definition's there. And this is why the courts ruled what they did. And notice that they say, oh, well, you know, back then we were kind of comfortable with our neighbors to the south, and we need to think about that. Give me a break.
Melanie, I mean, add to that the separatist movement in Quebec as well. But do you think that this is really, as Sabrina said, something that is 100% on the Trudeau government, and that the Carney government really is not going to wear any of this?
So far, he hasn't worn much at all of the Trudeau government. I mean, look, the other ministers that were involved in this were Marco Mendicino and David Lametti. And they are also not in cabinet now, although we're both senior advisors to the prime minister. And so they do still kind of lurk around in the background, I guess. I really think that they will not appeal this to the Supreme Court. I think that it would be wise for them to determine what appropriate restitution would be for the victims of this government overreach. So there are individuals whose bank accounts were frozen. There are people who lost their jobs because they donated like $100 to a GoFundMe. There were some pretty crazy things that happened during that period of time. And I think that the government would be wise to look at ways to compensate people who were hurt by this government overreach, and then like move on. I think that they're going to try to do that as quickly as possible, because frankly, that's been the Mark Carney playbook all along.
Now, this is a conservative commentator, and we pontificated on this the other day when we dropped the video announcing the new verdict and what was in there, and the fact that it was so soundly defeated the government appeal on the original decision, and that all three judges, they couldn't find a problem with anything that Judge Mosley did. So that's where this comes from, and there's no chance, I don't think, in my humble unexpert legal opinion, there's no chance that if this goes to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court overturns both the Federal Court of Appeal and Judge Mosley based on what we've read in the decision. So based on that alone, it doesn't make any sense. Now, I think the Carney government can wear some of this. Why? Because this appeal was going forward all last year. So the Carney government could have stepped in and told the Attorney General of Canada, you know what, just withdraw it. We're done. Let's move on.
Well, and some of the people that were in the Trudeau government are still present in the Carney government.
Yeah, a lot of people who voted for this are still there. A lot of people that were in cabinet during the Trudeau government are still there.
That voted for this. Yeah.
Right. And that was part of the original cabinet that invoked the Emergencies Act, right? Because remember, cabinet invokes it and then they vote on it about a week later. That's how the Emergencies Act works. So there were people there that said, yep, let's go. So I don't think this is just a Trudeau era type of thing. And Carney was advising Trudeau during that whole time. It's been fairly well publicized that Carney penned an op-ed that said, these people shouldn't have their rights that are protesting in front of Parliament. He was really unhappy with it. So, but nevertheless, I think Melanie's right. I think the government should lick its wounds and say, okay, let's move on from this. Let's pay restitution to the people that were wronged, that the court said was wronged, and try to come to some sort of closure, some sort of, amicable decision. Never mind the fact that, a lot of Canadians, and I think us included, feel that there should be some legal penalty for Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, and the senior cabinet ministers that pushed for this. Unfortunately, there is no legal avenue right now to actually criminalize this because it's not in the law, but we feel that it should be.
But restitution brings another issue, is that although we agree that the individual protesters and as a group, they were wronged and they deserve restitution, unfortunately, it's going to be the taxpayers on the hook. It's not coming from the Liberal Party coffers. It's going to be coming from taxpayers. And this government needs to wise up and not make these huge mistakes. It wasn't even a mistake. It was done on purpose to shut down a protest that they didn't like. And they need to stop stripping our rights away like this so that they then end up in court later on and have to pay restitution with taxpayer money.
Yeah, it's interesting, Carl, because, maybe that is in the cards, but certainly you have to wonder what the government would be weighing if they went Mel's direction and basically looked at some sort of compensation and just tried to say, okay, let's put this in the past.
Well, they can try to compensate, but if they don't, there will be lawsuits for sure.
Yeah.
So one way or the other, if they don't appeal this, it's not over. There's going to be more court hearings, more testimony. And so the question is how does the Mark Carney government wants to defend that decision by the Trudeau government? Do they want to go and fight at the Supreme Court and have a chance to overthrow this, or do they want to face multiple challenges? Because how do you offer a compensation, and how is it sufficient for those victims? That's going to be the question, because if you feel that you've been wronged, and so far the court says that you've been wronged, then you are in your right to ask for compensation, and what the government is going to offer is likely going to be seen as too low.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, the taxpayers will pay the price for that. Now the question politically is, how do you defend that Trudeau government decision? And if you don't, you're still going to end up having to pay the price anyway.
And that's what we just touched on. Yeah.
And kudos to the NDP. They just made some excellent points, because here's your decision. You either defend the Trudeau invocation of the Emergencies Act, which means this government is aligned with it, and then how do you separate yourself from that government? And then possibly win at the Supreme Court, which I don't think you're going to.
No, I don't think there was any procedural errors at the appellate court.
Right. And therefore no procedural errors at the lower court. So you end up basically going to the Supreme Court and losing, and then facing these potential lawsuits, or you don't appeal to the Supreme Court, and if you do nothing, you face the lawsuits, or you set up some sort of
restitution.
Yeah, restitution plan where it's not any kind of legal proceeding, even though it would be legal because it is restitution, but it would be a proactive, if you had if you were impacted by the Emergencies Act, we're inviting you to come to, we'll take your testimony, and let us know what you've gone through. People may choose to bring their lawyer, and they can take statements and try to put together some sort of approach or package for people to see if they will accept it. And then,
yeah, it's like a settlement, right?
Yeah, kind of what they're doing, what they're doing with the CRA hack. Which go and watch our video about if you have a chance to collect up to $5,000. In restitution from the government. They've admitted wrongdoing, and they are looking to settle based on that. So if you haven't seen our video, go check that out, and you'll be able to see.
And it is past the 15th of January now, so that website where you can check whether or not you've been affected is up and running.
But that's kind of what they could do here, is proactively say, okay, the court said we were wrong. We're wrong. Let's find a way forward. Let's see what the dollar figure is going to be. And the NDP just echoed what Tanya said. It's going to be costing taxpayers money, unfortunately. But I wasn't affected by this, but I'd be happy to pay some taxpayer money so that these people are whole.
Yeah, because this government, Rachel, goes to great pains to say we're not the other government. We have heard it a number of times, but at the same time, to Carl's point, it was a decision made at a moment in time that a commission looked at and had judged, that was right at the time. But legally, it's not meeting the threshold. So it really is a position almost like where the Carney government has to make a decision, not only for today, but for tomorrow and years on.
Yeah, certainly. I think at this point with this story, it is more deciding how the history books are going to remember this, because Canadians, I think, have largely made up their mind on this story. So politically, I don't see there being much damage for the Carney government if they decide one way or the other here. Really, I think Canadians have close this chapter, with the exception of those, obviously, who are continuing this fight. I think largely it's going to be an issue that potentially could blow back on folks like David Lametti, who is now representing Canada at the UN, who will likely be talking a lot about upholding the rule of law, for example, in that position. But for Prime Minister Mark Carney, I think he can basically just said what he said in China this week. This is a new Prime Minister. This is a new government. We have a new approach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this could be something that if he doesn't want to drag this out in the courts and focus his attention to other places, could be rather quickly wrapped up. But the other part of this I'm watching for, Mike, is how Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre goes after this. Obviously, he's got his leadership review coming up quite closely. He mined this for some good support at the time. Does he try to revive this, or is he also understanding that most Canadians
he did get some good support at the time from a certain segment of the population, but it hurt him with another segment of the population because it painted him in a corner that and that stuck with him all the way through the election.
Yeah, well, I guess it'll depend on which segment of that is showing up in Calgary in a few weeks.
Yeah, Mel, how does he balance that? Because this is something that may, to Carl and Rachel's point, actually be a bigger problem for Poilievre.
I don't think that it is, because the court has ruled here twice now that the government erred. The government was in the wrong by using the Emergencies Act. And the reality is the individuals who were hurt by this are victims of government overreach. And so I think that Pierre Poilievre would be right to call that what it is. And I also think that it would be a big waste of taxpayer money to appeal this to the Supreme Court. The taxpayer, Carl's right, taxpayer is going to pay one way or the other, but you're either going to pay a bunch of lawyers to waste more time at the Supreme Court, or you can pay the victims of the misuse of the Emergencies Act.
I love how they pivoted towards this making Pierre Poilievre look bad.
Right? We're talking about how the Liberal government exercised extreme government overreach that no other Canadian government has done, and they're making it Pierre Poilievre's problem. Right?
That's what the mainstream media does.
And then, oh, well, Mel, what does Pierre do about this? And kudos to her, man. She stood her ground and said, how is this a problem for Pierre?
The court's already ruled on this, not once, but twice.
Government overreach, which means Pierre has been right this whole time. The Conservatives have been right this whole time. Yeah, it's going to hurt Pierre Poilievre to be on the right side of history. Really? And the only reason any Canadians were against this is because the mainstream media was turning them against this. They were painting the narrative here. They were trying to tell everybody, oh, there's Nazis down there. They're waving swastika flags. They're white supremacists. There's all... Give me a break.
We've talked to a lot of the people, not only who were present, but the people leading the charge, and they are nothing like what the media was portraying.
Right. There was a very small section of people that were being jerks.
Agitators.
And some of them were even accused of being called in to be agitators. Who knows who did that? But the vast majority was bouncy castles, was barbecues.
Was Canadians standing up for their rights, as we're legally permitted to do.
And this is the gross thing. We're told that the Freedom Convoy was a bunch of hooligans that were being violent, trying to overthrow the government. Yet we see Palestinian protesters blocking traffic all over the country, are setting flags on fire, are threatening, literally threatening to end people right in front of police, and nothing happens to them. These are not the same. The convoy was not threatening violence towards anybody. That was determined. That was determined in the trial of Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, even though they were convicted. So, narrative control in action here, folks, but kudos to Melanie for pushing back against not just the Liberals, but everybody else on that panel.